I didn't know who that man was. I only knew that the moment he reached for my hand in the middle of a crowded restaurant and said, "My wife is here," the entire room fell into a stunned silence. Conversation stopped. Eyes turned. And something invisible, dangerous, locked into place. 3 days later, my daughter disappeared. And the last name I heard before the gunshot shattered the night was the name of the man I had just married. On paper. A stranger who claimed me as his wife. A lie meant to save my life. A name that would change everything. I woke to the quiet certainty that something in my life had gone terribly wrong. The room was unfamiliar, too large, too still. Pale morning light filtered through sheer curtains, illuminating walls of muted gray and the clean, masculine lines of furniture that spoke of money and restraint rather than comfort. The sheets beneath my fingers were silk smooth, cool against my skin. This was not my apartment. My heart began to race. I sat up abruptly, clutching the blanket to my chest, my gaze darting around the room in search of something, anything that made sense. A glass of water on the nightstand. A woman's phone, my phone, plugged into a charger I didn't recognize. And beside it, a ring, gold, simple, elegant, heavy in the way expensive things always are. I stared at it, my breath shallow, then slowly looked down at my left hand. There was a faint indentation around my ring finger, as if something had been there for hours, long enough to leave a mark. "No," I whispered, my voice barely more than air. I stumbled out of bed and crossed the room, my bare feet sinking into a thick rug. The mirror in the bathroom reflected a woman who looked exactly like me, Claire Walker, 28 years old, exhausted single mother, chronic overthinker, no bruises, no smudged makeup, no sign of last night's chaos. And yet, on the marble counter, laid out with deliberate precision, was a folded document. I unfolded it with shaking hands. Marriage license. My name printed neatly across the page. My signature at the bottom. Dated yesterday. The groom's name made my stomach drop. Dominic Russo. I had just enough time to register the impossible reality of it before a calm male voice spoke behind me. "You're awake." I spun around. He stood in the doorway as if he belonged there, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled back to reveal strong forearms marked faintly by scars that told stories I instinctively knew I didn't want to hear. Dark hair, darker eyes that studied me with unnerving focus, as though he were assessing not just my face, but my thoughts. "Who are you?" I demanded, backing away until the counter pressed into my spine. A pause. Then, slowly, a faint smile touched his lips. Not warm, not cruel, controlled. "Your husband." 24 hours earlier, I had believed my biggest problem was choosing whether I could afford dessert. The steakhouse on the corner of Fifth Avenue was far beyond my usual budget, but it was my birthday. And for once, I wanted to pretend my life wasn't an endless loop of bills, overtime shifts, and apologizing to my daughter for things I couldn't give her. "Table for one," the hostess asked gently. I nodded, ignoring the sting of those words. The restaurant buzzed with low conversation and clinking glasses. I ordered the cheapest wine and told myself I deserved this one quiet hour to feel like a person instead of a survivor. Then the atmosphere changed. It wasn't sudden, not exactly, more like a subtle tightening of the air. Conversations softened, heads turned. I looked up just as the doors opened. Men in dark suits entered first, their gazes sharp and alert, scanning the room with professional precision. Then he stepped inside. Dominic Russo. I didn't know his name then, but I felt his presence like gravity. He moved with unhurried confidence, every step measured, as though the world naturally rearranged itself to accommodate him. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored perfectly, the kind of quiet luxury that didn't need to announce itself. I looked away instinctively. Men like him existed in a different universe from women like me. That was when I noticed the man watching him from across the room. Broad, flashy, too loud for the elegance of the place. His gaze was calculating, predatory, lingering on Dominic with something like ownership. He stood as Dominic passed, blocking his path. Well, the man said, his voice carrying. Didn't think you'd show without your little secret. Dominic stopped. For the first time, his gaze flicked briefly, sharply to me. I felt it like a touch. Then he changed direction and walked straight to my table. My pulse thundered as he stopped beside me, one hand resting casually on the back of my chair. I'm sorry I'm late, he said smoothly, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Traffic. I stared at him, stunned. Before I could speak, he leaned closer, his mouth near my ear. Stand up, he murmured. Smile, and call me your husband. What I breathed. His voice dropped lower, edged with something dangerous. If you don't, we won't leave this restaurant safely. Fear sliced through me. I caught a glimpse of the other man's expression darkening, sharpening, as if something valuable was slipping from his grasp. Dominic straightened and wrapped an arm around my waist with intimate ease. This is my wife, he announced calmly. The word hit me like a physical blow. Silence fell. Then, slowly, the other man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Well, he said, congratulations. I didn't know you were the marrying kind. Dominic's grip tightened imperceptibly. There are many things you don't know. I should have run. Instead, I stood. My legs trembled, but I forced a smile and slipped my arm through his, leaning into him as if I'd done this 1,000 times. I'm sorry, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I kept him waiting. Dominic looked down at me. For a split second, something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Approval. He pressed a brief kiss to my forehead, gentle, controlled, devastatingly convincing. The other man watched closely and nodded. Later, as we walked out into the night, Dominic didn't release me until we reached a sleek black car waiting at the curb. Only then did he look at me fully. You did well, he said. I laughed shakily. You kidnapped me. No, he corrected. I borrowed you. For what? For survival. The city lights blurred past as the car pulled away. I didn't know where we were going. I didn't know who he really was. I only knew that when he placed the ring on my finger later that night, cool metal sliding into place, I didn't pull away. And when exhaustion finally claimed me, I never felt the moment I signed my name. Now, standing barefoot in a stranger's bathroom, clutching proof of a marriage I couldn't remember, I met Dominic Russo's steady gaze. You planned this, I said hoarsely. Yes. Why me? His eyes softened, just slightly, enough to make it terrifying. Because, he said quietly, you were the only one who could convince my enemy that I have something to lose. My blood ran cold. What happens now? I asked. Dominic stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his voice low and deliberate. Now, he said, you play the role of my wife. For how long? A pause. Until it stops being pretend. I didn't know then that this marriage would put my daughter in danger, or that loving Dominic Russo would cost me everything I thought I was protecting. I only knew that my life had already split into before him and after him, and there was no way back. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. Dominic Russo did not ask if I agreed. He moved through the penthouse with the calm authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed, pouring coffee as if we were an ordinary couple greeting a normal morning. The scent was rich, grounding, dangerously domestic. You'll need to learn the rules, he said, setting a cup in front of me. I didn't touch it. I didn't agree to anything. His gaze lifted, sharp but unreadable. You stood up in that restaurant. I stood up because you terrified me. A corner of his mouth curved, not in amusement but acknowledgement. Fear keeps people alive. I folded my arms, forcing myself not to step back as he came closer. What exactly do you expect from me? Dominic. He leaned against the counter, studying me as though weighing options that extended far beyond this room. In public. You are my wife. You don't hesitate. You don't contradict me. You don't leave my side unless I say so. And in private, I challenged. His eyes darkened. In private, you remain under my protection. Something in the way he said it firm, final, sent a chill down my spine. I have a daughter. I said quietly. She comes first. Always. His expression shifted, not softened. Sharpened. I know. That single sentence unnerved me more than any threat could have. By noon, my life had been rearranged with ruthless efficiency. A woman named Elena arrived elegant, composed, professional. She spoke to Dominic in low tones before turning to me with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'll be assisting you while you're here, she said. Wardrobe, schedule, appearances. Appearances, I echoed. Dominic answered for her. My enemies watch everything. They will look for cracks. And if they find one, I asked. He met my gaze steadily. They exploit it. Elena led me to a room that could only be described as a dream curated by someone who knew my size, my taste, my weaknesses. Dresses lined the closet in muted colors. Shoes arranged by height and style. Jewelry laid out with careful restraint. It was overwhelming, invasive, thoughtful in a way that made my chest tighten. This is temporary, I murmured, more to myself than anyone else. Temporary arrangements often leave permanent marks. Elena replied gently. That evening, Dominic took me out, not to dinner, to an event. The car glided up to a private residence in the Hamptons, lights spilling onto the gravel drive. Music drifted through open doors. Laughter, wealth. Dominic stepped out first, then offered his hand. Remember, he said softly, for my ears alone, tonight, you love me. I placed my hand in his. The effect was immediate. Eyes turned, conversations paused. Whispers followed us like a tide. Dominic's hand rested at the small of my back, firm, claiming. Every movement between us was rehearsed perfection, though I'd never practiced this role before. You look convincing, a woman murmured as we passed. I smiled. I leaned into him. I let the illusion breathe. Inside, the air buzzed with power. Men who smiled too easily, women who watched too closely. Dominic greeted them all with polite indifference, never releasing me. Then I felt it. The shift. A man near the bar watched us with unsettling interest, his gaze lingering a second too long. Dominic noticed instantly. His grip tightened. Victor Hale, he murmured. The man you saved me from last night. My pulse spiked. What does he want you? Dominic said. Or rather, what you represent. Victor approached, glass in hand, his smile sharp. Russo, you surprise me. Dominic nodded. Victor, and this must be the wife. Victor's eyes swept over me slowly. You appeared out of nowhere. I forced a soft laugh. Love tends to do that. Dominic's arm slid around my waist, pulling me closer. Claire prefers privacy. Of course, Victor said, though his gaze lingered. A pity. I would have liked to get to know her. Something cold flickered in Dominic's eyes. That won't be necessary. Victor raised his glass. Enjoy the night. As he walked away, my knees nearly gave out. He doesn't believe us, I whispered. Oh, he believes, Dominic replied. That's the problem. Later, on the terrace overlooking the ocean, the act began to blur. Dominic stood close, shielding me from the wind, his coat draped over my shoulders without a word. The gesture was automatic, instinctive. Why do this? I asked softly. Why not just kill him? He exhaled slowly. Because violence is a language that always demands an answer. This makes him hesitate. Using me, yes, he admitted, and protecting you. I looked up at him. Which matters more? For the first time, he hesitated. Before he could answer, a voice interrupted. "Brother." A woman approached tall, striking, her dark eyes unmistakably similar to Dominic's. "Isabella," he said coolly. She assessed me with open curiosity. "So you're real?" I stiffened. She smiled faintly. "Relax. If you weren't, you wouldn't be here." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Watch your tone." Isabella's gaze flicked between us. "Be careful," she said to me. "My brother doesn't bring people into this world unless he intends to keep them." "That sounds like a threat," I said quietly. "A warning," she corrected, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. The drive back was silent. The city lights reflected off the windshield as Dominic stared ahead, his expression closed. "Does she hate me?" I asked. "No," he said after a moment. "She fears what you represent." "And what's that?" He glanced at me, his gaze lingering. "Change." The car stopped. We were back at the penthouse. Inside, the silence felt heavier than before. "You were impressive tonight," Dominic said. "Victor will push harder now." "I don't want to be your weakness," I replied. His voice dropped. "You already are." The admission hung between us, dangerous and intimate. He stepped closer. I didn't move. "This cannot cross a line," I said, my heart racing. "I'm not your dead wife. I'm not a pawn." "No," he agreed softly. "You're something far more unpredictable." His hand rose, stopping inches from my face, as if giving me the chance to pull away. I didn't. The kiss was restrained, brief, a question rather than a claim. When he stepped back, his eyes were dark with restraint. "We don't do this again," he said. I nodded, though my body still burned. As he turned away, my phone vibrated, a message from my daughter's babysitter. "Claire, are you sure this man is your husband? Someone was asking about you today." My blood ran cold. Somewhere in the city, Victor Hale was no longer watching Dominic Russo. He was watching me. The first rule Dominic broke was the one about distance. He didn't touch me again after that restrained kiss. He didn't need to. From that night on, his presence followed me everywhere quiet, unyielding, like a shadow that moved before I did. Men I never saw spoke into hidden microphones. Cars I didn't recognize idled across the street. My phone was replaced with another one I hadn't asked for, already loaded with numbers I wasn't supposed to call unless it was an emergency. "You're being cautious," I said one morning as he read through reports at the kitchen island. "I'm being realistic," Dominic replied without looking up. "Victor doesn't test boundaries. He exploits them." I thought of the message from the babysitter, the unease that had settled in my chest and refused to leave. He knows about my daughter. Dominic's fingers stilled. How much, he asked? I don't know, I admitted. Enough to ask questions. He closed the file and finally met my gaze. The calm authority he carried so effortlessly cracked just enough for something darker to show through. "That cannot happen again." It wasn't a reassurance. It was a promise. By the afternoon, Dominic had made his decision. "Lily will stay here," he said, "with you." I stared at him, disbelief flashing into anger. "Absolutely not. She's already a target," he countered. "This is the safest place for her. This is your world." I snapped. "It's dangerous." "So is pretending she doesn't exist," he said quietly. The argument ended the way all arguments with Dominic did not, with raised voices, but with an unspoken acknowledgement of reality. I hated how convincing he was. I hated more that part of me believed him. When Lily arrived that evening, clutching her stuffed rabbit and looking around the penthouse with wide-eyed curiosity, something in Dominic shifted. He crouched to her level, his imposing presence gentled by the effort. "Hello, Lily," he said. "I'm Dominic." She studied him seriously. "Are you my mom's boss?" I swallowed a laugh. Dominic hesitated, then answered honestly. "Something like that." She nodded as if that explained everything. Later, as she explored the living room, Dominic watched her with an intensity that unsettled me. You don't have to stay, I told him. She's shy. I'll stay, he replied. She should know who's protecting her. The word echoed in my mind. Protecting. The illusion of safety lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th, everything unraveled. It began with a routine drive Dominic's security detail escorting Lily and me to a private park overlooking the water. The sun was bright. The day deceptively peaceful. Lily ran ahead, laughing, her joy a fragile thing I clung to. I didn't see the man approach. I felt him. A shift in the air. A presence too close. Claire Walker, a voice said calmly behind me. I turned. He was unremarkable in the way truly dangerous people often are. Mid-30s, casual clothes, eyes that assessed, not admired. Who are you? I demanded, pulling Lily closer. A messenger, he replied, from someone who would like a conversation. Before I could react, hands grabbed me from behind. Chaos erupted, shouts, the sound of a gun being drawn. And then Dominic's voice cut through everything. Get away from her! The man froze. Dominic stepped forward, his expression lethal, his gun raised with unshaking precision. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them. Tell Victor, Dominic said evenly, that he's crossed a line he can't erase. The man smiled thinly. He says you already have. They retreated quickly, melting back into the city as if they'd never been there. Lily clung to me, trembling. Dominic holstered his gun and turned to us. His hands were gentle as he checked Lily for injuries. Are you hurt? He asked her softly. She shook her head, eyes brimming with tears. They were scary. I know, he said. But they won't touch you again. I looked up at him. You can't promise that. His jaw tightened. I can. That night, Lily slept between us. It wasn't planned. She had woken from a nightmare, sobbing, and neither of us had the heart to send her back to her room. Dominic lay stiffly on the other side of the bed, a silent guardian pretending not to notice how close we were. In the dim light, I studied his profile, the hard lines softened by exhaustion, the faint scar near his temple I'd never noticed before. Why are you really doing this? I whispered. His voice was low, careful, because Victor doesn't believe in limits. That's not an answer. He exhaled. Because once, I failed to protect someone who trusted me. The admission was quiet, raw. Your wife, I asked. Yes, I hesitated. Was she innocent? A pause. Too long. She was brave. He said finally, and that made her dangerous to my enemies. I understood then. Loving Dominic Russo was not just risky, it was fatal. The next day, Isabella arrived unannounced. She took one look at Lily playing on the floor and swore under her breath. You're insane. Dominic didn't deny it. You brought a child into this, Isabella said sharply. Victor will use her. He tried, Dominic replied, and failed. Isabella turned to me. You should leave. I met her gaze steadily. And go where she faltered. Exactly, Dominic said. This ends when I decide it ends. Or when Victor forces your hand, Isabella shot back. You're not invincible. Dominic. No, he agreed, but I'm not careless either. Isabella's eyes flicked to Lily, then back to me. If he dies because of you, I won't. I interrupted. I won't be the reason. She studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded once. See that you're not. That evening, as Dominic and I stood on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker below, the weight of everything pressed down on me. This isn't sustainable, I said. We can't keep pretending. We're not pretending, he replied quietly. I turned to him. Then what are we doing? His gaze held mine, dark and unwavering, building a truth convincing enough to survive a lie. Before I could respond, his phone rang. He listened in silence, his expression hardening with every word. When he ended the call, he looked at me with something like regret. "Victor has made his move," he said. "He's inviting us to dinner." My heart sank. "That's a trap." "Yes," Dominic agreed calmly. "And we're going." I reached for his arm. "Dominic." He covered my hand with his, firm and warm. This is where the game changes. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that accepting his protection meant accepting his war. And once you enter a war like Dominic Russo's, there is no neutral ground. Only sides. The restaurant Victor Hale chose did not advertise itself. There was no sign on the street, no windows, no valet, only a steel door tucked between two abandoned buildings near the harbor, guarded by men who didn't pretend to be anything other than armed. Dominic's hand settled at my lower back as we stepped out of the car steady, possessive, deliberate. Not for comfort, for display. "Remember," he murmured, his lips barely moving. "Tonight, he is not allowed to see fear." I lifted my chin. "And if I feel it, then feel it quietly," he said, "and hold my hand." The door opened. Victor Hale was already waiting. The private dining room was lit by a single chandelier, its warm glow softening nothing. The table was long, polished, set with crystal glasses and silverware too sharp to be decorative. Victor stood at the head, smiling like a gracious host, welcoming honored guests rather than enemies. "Dominic," he said warmly, "and Claire, I'm glad you accepted." Dominic nodded. Curiosity won. Victor laughed. It always does. We took our seats opposite him. The moment my chair touched the floor, I felt the invisible pressure of being watched, measured, evaluated. This was not a dinner. It was an examination. Wine was poured, plates arrived. Conversation began lightly, deceptively. Victor spoke of business, of investments, of the city's changing tides. Dominic replied with polite disinterest. I played my role smiling at the right moments, touching Dominic's arm as if it were instinct rather than strategy. Then Victor leaned back in his chair and studied me openly. "You know," he said, "I had trouble believing you were real." I met his gaze calmly. I get that a lot. His smile widened. "You appeared so suddenly, almost like a miracle." Dominic's fingers tightened slightly against my skin, or a vulnerability. Victor continued. "Miracles don't usually walk into men like us." I didn't walk in. I replied softly. "I was invited," Victor chuckled, "by Dominic, which makes you his choice." Something dark flashed in his eyes. "Doesn't that frighten you?" I glanced at Dominic before answering. "I trust my husband." The word hung in the air. Victor's smile thinned. "Trust is expensive. So is betrayal," Dominic said evenly. Silence followed. Then Victor raised his glass. "To honesty," he said, "rare, but refreshing." Dessert arrived untouched. Victor set his fork down and folded his hands. "I'll be direct. I don't like surprises." Dominic leaned back. "Then you should stop creating them." Victor ignored the comment, his gaze fixed on me. "You have a daughter." The room seemed to tilt. I didn't look away. "Yes, beautiful age," Victor said casually. "Still believes the world is kind." Dominic moved instantly. His chair scraped softly as he leaned forward, voice deadly calm. "Say her name." Victor smiled. "Why would I?" The air thickened, heavy with the promise of violence. "You invited us to dinner." Dominic continued. "Speak to me." Victor's eyes flicked back to him. "Fine. I want to know what you're willing to lose." Dominic didn't hesitate. "Nothing." "That's a lie," Victor said lightly. "You lost once before." Something in Dominic's expression changed, not anger, but a cold, sharpened focus. "Careful," he warned. Victor leaned closer. "You replaced her quickly." My breath caught. "I'm not a replacement," I said quietly. Victor tilted his head. No, your leverage. Before Dominic could respond, Victor stood. Enjoy your evening? The message was clear. This was not a negotiation. It was a declaration. The ride back was silent. The city blurred past, lights streaking across the windows like fractured thoughts. Dominic stared ahead, his jaw set, his body coiled with restraint. I didn't know he'd mention her, he said finally. Your wife? I said, yes. I hesitated. How did she die? His hands tightened on the steering wheel. She trusted the wrong person. And you blame yourself. Yes. The honesty surprised me. Dominic, I said softly, Victor wants you to react. I know. And you won't. I can't afford to. We reached the penthouse. The doors closed behind us with a finality that made my chest ache. I turned to him. This ends when... He looked at me, really looked at me, as if weighing a truth he'd been avoiding. When one of us breaks, he said. That night, sleep refused to come. I stood by the window, watching the city pulse below, my thoughts circling dangerous truths. Dominic joined me without a word, standing close enough that I could feel his warmth. You shouldn't stay, he said quietly. I looked at him. Is that what you want? No, he admitted. But it may be what you need. And Lily. She'll be safe, he said. With or without me. The implication cut deeper than he realized. You don't believe that, I said. You believe she's only safe if you're in control. He didn't deny it. Then don't push us away, I whispered. He turned toward me, conflict etched into every line of his face. You don't understand what it costs to keep people alive in my world. I understand fear, I replied. And I understand choice. I reached for his hand. This time, he didn't pull away. The kiss that followed was not restrained. It was slow, deliberate, heavy with everything we weren't saying. When we finally parted, his forehead rested against mine. This can't be love, he said hoarsely. Then don't call it that, I replied. Just don't pretend it's nothing. The next morning, Dominic was gone. No note, no warning. Only Isabella waiting in the living room, her expression grave. He's setting a trap, she said, for Victor. And you're telling me because I asked, because he won't come back if it fails. My heart clenched. Where is he? She shook her head. You're not part of this. I smiled faintly. That's where you're wrong. Isabella studied me, then sighed. You really don't know when to walk away. No, I agreed. I know when not to. As she turned to leave, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered instinctively. Victor's voice slid through the line, smooth and satisfied. Claire, he said, your husband is making a mistake. My blood ran cold. Where is he? Victor laughed softly. That depends. On what? On how much you're willing to prove that you belong to him. The line went dead. And I knew then the war Dominic Russo had tried to shield me from had finally learned how to reach my heart. The silence Victor left behind was louder than any threat. I stood in the living room long after the call ended, phone pressed to my ear, my pulse hammering as if it were trying to break free of my chest. Dominic was gone, not missing, gone with intention. The kind of absence that was planned, deliberate, and terrifying. Isabella watched me carefully, as though measuring how much damage the truth had already done. He won't answer you, she said. Not until this is over. When is that? I asked. She hesitated. When Victor bleeds, or Dominic does. The words settled between us, heavy and final. Then I'm not waiting. I said. Isabella's expression hardened. You think this is bravery walking into a war zone because you're afraid to be left behind, I replied calmly. I think this is what happens when you care about someone who refuses to fight alone. She studied me for a long moment, then exhaled sharply. You're not what he planned for. Neither was Lily. I said, "That did it." Isabella turned away, already reaching for her phone. "Get dressed," she said. "If you're doing this, you do it properly." They didn't take me to Dominic. Not directly. Instead, Isabella led me through a part of the city I'd never seen before. Quiet streets near the docks. Warehouses crouched like sleeping beasts along the water. The air smelled of salt and rust and old secrets. "This is where Victor does his thinking," she said as we stopped outside a nondescript building. "He won't be here, but his men will." "And Dominic?" I asked. "Somewhere Victor believes he can't be reached." I swallowed. "Then why bring me here?" Isabella met my gaze. "Because Victor believes you're the reach." Inside, the building was deceptively simple. Concrete floors, fluorescent lights, men who watched me with open curiosity, their hands never far from their weapons. A man stepped forward, tall and angular, his smile devoid of warmth. "Mrs. Russo," he said, "we were expecting you." "Then let's not disappoint each other," I replied. They led me into a small office overlooking the water. The windows were barred, the desk bare except for a single envelope. "From Victor," the man said. "He thought you'd appreciate clarity." Inside was a photograph. Dominic, bound to a chair, blood drying at his temple, his gaze lifted straight to the camera, defiant. Furious, alive. My breath caught, but I didn't let my expression change. "He's strong," the man continued. "But even strong men have limits." "What does Victor want?" I asked. The man leaned closer. "Your cooperation." They gave me an hour to understand the rules of a game I hadn't agreed to play. Victor wanted proof not of love, but of loyalty. He wanted me to walk away publicly, loudly, to leave Dominic, denounce him, fracture the illusion he'd built so carefully. In return, the man said, "He lives." "And if I refuse?" The man shrugged. "Then his mistakes catch up to him." I thought of Lily, safe in the penthouse, unaware of the line being drawn through her future. I thought of Dominic's hand steady at my back, the way his voice softened only when he thought no one was listening. "I'll do it," I said. Isabella stiffened. "Claire." "But on my terms," I added. The man smiled thinly. "Victor likes confidence." "Then tell him this." I said, "I'll leave Dominic Russo, but I do it in front of everyone. One event, one statement. After that, he releases Dominic." "And you?" Isabella asked quietly. I looked at her. "I survive." The gala was announced the next morning. A charity event in Manhattan. Press invited. Cameras everywhere. Victor's name was conspicuously absent from the guest list. But his presence was undeniable. Dominic arrived late. When he saw me standing alone at the entrance, something dark and dangerous flashed across his face. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low, controlled. I stepped closer, my smile brittle, finishing what we started. His eyes searched mine, sharp and pleading at once. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," I whispered, "but this is the only way." Understanding dawned too slowly. "Claire." I turned to face the cameras. "Dominic Russo and I are separating," I said clearly. "Our marriage was a mistake." The words tasted like ash. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Dominic stared at me as if I'd struck him. "This is what you want?" he asked quietly. I met his gaze, forcing my voice steady. "Yes, a lie, but a necessary one." Victor's men were watching. I felt it in the air, the subtle release of tension as the illusion cracked. Dominic stepped back, his expression closing off entirely. "Then go," he said. I did. Every step away from him felt like tearing something vital loose. They released Dominic an hour later. Isabella called me, her voice tight. "He's alive!" I sagged against the wall, relief crashing over me so hard it hurt. "And Victor, he thinks he's won." I laughed softly. He has no idea. That night, I packed. Not to run, to prepare. When Dominic returned to the penthouse, I was waiting. You played him, he said flatly. I saved you. I replied. His jaw tightened. You endangered yourself. So did you. I shot back. You don't get to decide who bleeds for you. Silence fell. Then, quietly, I never wanted you to pay this price. I stepped closer. Then stop pretending I'm not already part of this. He looked at me then, not as a shield, not as leverage, but as something chosen. Victor will come for you now, he said. I nodded. Good. He frowned. Good. Yes, I said softly, because I'm done being his bargaining chip. Dominic studied me for a long moment, then reached for my hand. Once we do this, he said, there's no going back. I squeezed his fingers. I already left once. Outside, the city hummed, unaware that the balance had shifted. Victor Hale thought he'd broken us. What he'd done instead was teach me exactly how dangerous love could be and how far I was willing to go to protect it. The city did not know we were broken. By morning, headlines whispered speculation. A brief union ends as quickly as it began. Commentators smiled, investors relaxed, and Victor Hale, somewhere behind mirrored glass, believed the world had tilted back in his favor. Inside the penthouse, the lie lived with us. Dominic did not touch me, not accidentally, not in passing. He moved around me as if distance were a new law he'd written into existence. When our eyes met, they slid away careful, controlled, and unbearably intimate in their restraint. You should stay out of sight for a few days, he said, not looking up from his phone. Out of whose sight, I asked. Everyone's. And Lily, she stays, he replied, with guards. The words settled like iron between us. I'm not a ghost, I said quietly. You don't get to erase me to protect me. He finally looked up then, his expression tight with something close to pain. I'm not erasing you. I'm buying time. For whom I pressed. For the moment when Victor makes his final mistake. Victor didn't wait long. The invitation arrived that afternoon, handwritten, delivered by a man with no name and a smile that never reached his eyes. An apology requires an audience. It named a venue on the edge of the city, an old opera house scheduled for demolition. One night only. Dominic read it once and folded it carefully. He wants to see if the fracture holds. Does it? I asked. His gaze flicked to me. That depends on you. I understood then. The lie had become a blade, and Victor intended to see how deeply it cut. The opera house smelled of dust and faded grandeur, red velvet seats, peeling gold trim, a stage that had once held music and now waited for blood. Victor stood beneath the chandelier like a patron of lost art, dressed impeccably, his smile smooth and satisfied. Dominic, he said warmly, you came alone. Dominic's voice was calm. You asked for an audience. Victor's eyes shifted to me. And you brought the proof. I kept my chin lifted, my expression composed. This was the performance he wanted. The woman who had walked away. I wanted to apologize. Victor continued. I underestimated your priorities. Dominic's jaw tightened. Get to the point. Victor gestured toward the stage. I'd like you both to sit. We did. Lights dimmed. The chandelier glowed brighter. This world, Victor said conversationally, is built on perception. People believe what they're shown. And you, Dominic, showed them something very convincing. He turned to me, until she decided otherwise. I didn't flinch. People leave. Yes, Victor agreed, but they rarely leave men like you. Dominic leaned forward. You said apology. Victor smiled. This is it. The screen behind him flickered to life. Security footage. Lily walking into her school. Lily laughing with another child. Lily turning confused as a man stepped into frame. I rose halfway from my seat before Dominic's hand closed around my wrist, grounding me. Victor's voice remained smooth. Relax. She's safe. For now. My breath came shallow. You promised. I promised, Dominic. Victor corrected. And promises evolve. Dominic stood slowly. You touch her, and there won't be a place on this earth where you can hide. Victor's smile faded. You're in no position to make demands. I pulled free from Dominic's grasp and stepped forward. You want proof, I said evenly? You want to know the fracture holds? Victor's eyes gleamed. Yes. I turned to Dominic. The man who had become my shelter, my storm, my impossible mistake. I meant what I said, I told him, loud enough for the room to hear. This was a mistake. The words tore through me like glass. Dominic's face went still. You chose this world. I continued. And I won't raise my daughter in it. Silence stretched. Victor studied us both, searching for cracks. Convincing. He said finally. Painful, too. He waved a hand. The screen went dark. Your daughter will be returned, Victor said. Tonight. Relief nearly buckled my knees. But, he added, the next move is yours, Dominic, and I suggest you make it carefully. Lily was asleep when she came home. I sat on the edge of her bed, watching her chest rise and fall, the familiar weight of love and terror pressing into my ribs. Dominic stood in the doorway, silent. She's safe, he said. For now. I replied. I rose and turned to him, every careful barrier gone. You can't do this anymore. Not like this. His eyes burned. I know. Then end it. He exhaled slowly. Ending it costs lives. Continuing costs mine, I said softly. The truth landed between us. Undeniable. I need you to trust me, he said. Just a little longer. I shook my head. I've trusted you from the moment you called me your wife. This isn't about trust anymore. It's about survival. It's about choice. I countered, and I choose not to be collateral. He stepped closer, his voice low. If you walk away now, I'm not walking away. I interrupted. I'm stepping forward. Understanding dawned slowly in his eyes. You have a plan, he said. Yes. A dangerous one. I smiled faintly, learned from the best. The next day, I did something Victor didn't expect. I went public, not with accusations, with absence. I left the penthouse, took Lily, moved into a small apartment under an assumed name, protected but visible, a woman starting over, a mother choosing quiet over power. Dominic watched it happen through screens and reports, fury and admiration warring in his chest. Victor watched too, and he smiled, because this time, the bait had teeth. That night, Dominic came to me not as a boss, not as a protector, but as a man stripped of illusions. I can't keep you safe from afar, he said. Then don't. I replied. Stand beside me. He closed his eyes briefly, as if making a decision he'd avoided too long. When this ends, he said, I may not be who I was. I met his gaze. When this ends, neither will I. Outside, the city held its breath. Victor Hale believed he had broken our bond with lies sharp enough to draw blood. What he hadn't realized was that some lies don't weaken love. They harden it into a weapon. The apartment was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind. This was the kind of silence that waited, alert and listening, as if it expected something to break it open. Lily slept in the bedroom, her small breaths steady, unaware that the world outside her dreams had sharpened its knives again. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of untouched tea cooling between my hands. When the knock came, 3 taps, controlled, familiar. I didn't need to look through the peephole. Dominic stood on the other side of the door like a man who had already decided to lose something. I let him in. He didn't speak at first. He scanned the apartment with trained efficiency windows, exits, shadows, then finally looked at me. The dim light stripped away his armor. No suit, no entourage, just a man carrying the weight of choices that could no longer be undone. "You shouldn't have come alone," I said. "I didn't come to protect you," he replied quietly. "I came to listen." That was new. I gestured toward the chair across from me. He didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against the counter, close enough that I could feel the tension in him, the barely contained violence and restraint coiled together. Victor made a move. He said, "Not toward you." My heart clenched. "Toward whom, my sister?" The words landed like a blow. "He believes Isabella knows where you are," Dominic continued. "And he's right." I stood. "Then this ends tonight." "No," Dominic said sharply. "This ends when I decide how many people die for it." I met his gaze, unwavering. "You don't get to carry this alone anymore." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he reached into his jacket and placed a phone on the table. "One call," he said. "If anything goes wrong." "And if I don't make it?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Then I burn the world down." The warehouse stood at the edge of the river, its windows dark, its doors wide open in invitation. Victor Hale was inside, waiting. I felt Dominic's hand brush mine as we stepped out of the car. Not possessive, not protective. A question. I answered by intertwining our fingers. Victor's smile widened when he saw us. "Together again," he said. "How sentimental." "You asked for me," I said calmly. "I'm here." "Yes," Victor replied. "But you brought him anyway." Dominic's voice was flat. "You wanted proof." Victor gestured to the empty space between us. "Then show me." The air thickened. I turned to Dominic. This was the moment Victor had engineered. The fracture, displayed, the final test. "I need you to let me go," I said softly. Dominic's breath hitched, barely perceptible. "Say it again," he said, his voice low. "I need you to walk away." I continued, louder now. "If you don't, he'll never stop." Victor watched closely, savoring every second. Dominic searched my face as if memorizing it. Then, slowly, he released my hand. The gesture was devastating in its simplicity. "I never wanted this," he said. "I know," I whispered. He stepped back. Victor laughed, delighted. "There it is. The truth." But Dominic wasn't finished. He turned his back on me and walked away 3 steps, each one an act of violence against himself. Then he stopped, without turning around. He spoke. "If you ever touch her again," he said to Victor, "you will not die quickly." Victor's smile faltered. Dominic left. The door closed behind him, and for the first time since this began, I was truly alone. Victor approached, his satisfaction palpable, impressive. He said, "You broke him." "No," I replied. "You misunderstood him." His eyes narrowed. "You wanted to know the price of belonging." I continued calmly. "This is it. He paid it." Victor studied me with renewed interest. "And you, I'm still standing." He smiled slowly. "For now." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me tense. Every shadow felt too close. I checked on Lily twice, then a 3rd time, pressing a kiss to her hair, memorizing the warmth of her. Just before dawn, my phone vibrated. A message. No number. "He's not coming back for you." I stared at the screen, my chest aching with a pain so sharp it stole my breath. Then another message arrived. "Unless you ask him to." I closed my eyes. Victor was playing the oldest game there was: love as leverage, silence as a weapon. I typed back one word. "Where?" They took me to a church. Abandoned. Stained glass shattered. Pews overturned. The altar cracked down the middle like a warning. Dominic was there, on his knees. Blood darkened his shirt, his hands bound, his head bowed as if in prayer. The sight of him like that, broken, contained ignited something feral in me. Victor stood beside him, a gun resting casually against his palm. "I told you he'd come back." Victor said, All men do. I walked forward, every step deliberate. Let him go, I said. Victor tilted his head. And why would I do that? Because this ends now, I replied. With me? Understanding dawned slowly in Dominic's eyes as he looked up at me. No, he said hoarsely. Claire. Don't. I ignored him and met Victor's gaze. You want him to choose. So do I. Victor smiled. Go on. I knelt in front of Dominic, my hands trembling as I cupped his face. I asked you to let me go, I whispered. And you did. His eyes burned. I would do it again. I know, I said softly. That's why I'm choosing you now. I stood and faced Victor. You want proof of belonging, I said. Here it is. I stay. He walks. Silence fell. Victor considered this, then laughed. You're braver than I thought. He raised the gun. Time slowed. Dominic surged forward, straining against his restraints. Claire. The gun didn't fire. Instead, men flooded the church, weapons raised, shouts echoing off broken walls. Isabella's voice rang out. Now, chaos exploded. Shots, glass shattering, Victor shouting orders. I dropped to the floor as Dominic was dragged free, his bonds cut in seconds. He pulled me into his arms, shielding me, his heartbeat thunderous beneath my cheek. When it was over, Victor was gone, escaped. But his empire was bleeding. Dominic held my face, his hands shaking. You shouldn't have come back. I smiled through tears. You let me go, and I hated myself for it. He confessed. I leaned into him, our foreheads touching amid the wreckage. This isn't over, I said. No, he agreed. But now, we fight together. Outside, dawn crept through shattered glass, pale and unforgiving. Victor Hale was still free. And love, once used as a weapon against us, had become something far more dangerous, a choice we were willing to die for. Dominic collapsed an hour after we left the church. Not dramatically, not with warning, just a quiet, faltering step as we reached the edge of the safe house hallway. His weight suddenly heavy in my arms, his breath ragged and uneven. Dominic, I whispered, panic slicing through me. He didn't answer. Blood bloomed dark against his shirt, spreading where I hadn't noticed the wound before, where adrenaline had carried him farther than his body could follow. Get a medic. Isabella snapped into her phone as we lowered him to the floor. Her composure cracked for the first time since I'd met her. Now, I knelt beside him, my hands shaking as I pressed against the wound, feeling warmth seep through my fingers. You don't get to leave, I said fiercely, leaning close to his ear. You don't get to choose that. His lashes fluttered. You came back, he murmured faintly. I'm right here, I said, my voice breaking despite myself. Stay with me. The medic arrived within minutes, but time stretched unbearably thin. I watched Dominic's chest rise and fall, each breath a fragile victory. When they wheeled him away, I followed until Isabella stopped me at the door. He needs surgery, she said. You need to stay. I'm not leaving, I said flatly. She studied me, then nodded once. Then prepare yourself. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and regret. I sat alone, replaying every moment that had led us here the restaurant. The lie, the way love had crept in through fear and stubbornness. I realized then how quietly it had happened. Not in grand declarations, but in small, unguarded moments, his coat over my shoulders. The way he watched Lily sleep. The night he let me go even though it tore him apart. Hours passed. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was grave but not defeated. He's alive, he said, but he lost a lot of blood. The next 24 hours are critical. Relief hit me so hard my knees nearly gave out. Can I see him? Yes, the doctor replied. Briefly. Dominic lay pale against white sheets, machines humming softly around him. The man who had once seemed untouchable now looked heartbreakingly human. I took his hand. "Don't you dare," I whispered. "I didn't fight this hard to lose you now." His fingers twitched, barely perceptible, but enough. He woke at dawn. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening when they found me. Confusion flickered, then recognition. "You look angry," he rasped. Tears spilled before I could stop them. "You nearly died." A faint smile touched his lips. "I've had worse mornings." I laughed through my tears, pressing my forehead to his hand. "You're impossible." "Still here," he corrected softly. Silence settled between us, gentle this time. Victor escaped. He said eventually, "I know." I replied, "Isabella told me?" His jaw tightened. "This isn't over." "No," I agreed. "But neither are we." He studied me carefully. "You stayed." "I chose." I said, "There's a difference." His eyes darkened with emotion he didn't try to hide. "Claire, loving me is not safe. I know." I said, "But neither is running anymore." He closed his eyes briefly, as if surrendering to a truth he could no longer outrun. Recovery forced stillness on him. Days blurred together in the safe house. Dominic confined to bed, stripped of command and control. Isabella ran operations. Guards rotated quietly. The war continued outside, but inside, something else grew slow, tentative, fragile. I brought him coffee he couldn't drink yet, read to him from books Lily chose, sat with him in silence that felt earned rather than empty. One evening, as rain traced patterns against the window, he spoke. "My wife died because she trusted me to keep her safe." He said quietly, "I told myself I would never let that happen again. And yet," I said softly, "and yet I brought you into this." He finished. "I broke my own vow." I met his gaze. "You didn't bring me. I walked in. That doesn't absolve me." "No," I agreed, "but it means we're responsible together." He exhaled slowly. "If Victor comes for you again?" "He will," I said calmly. Dominic's eyes sharpened. "Then I will end him." "Not alone," I replied. He searched my face, then nodded. "Together." Lily visited him the next day. She climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed, her small hand slipping into his. "You're hurt," she said solemnly. "Yes," Dominic replied. "But I'll heal." She considered this. "My mom says you're very brave." He glanced at me. "Your mom is very kind." Lily smiled, then leaned closer. "When you're better, can you come to my school?" He hesitated. "Why?" "Because everyone should know you're my family," she said simply. The word hung in the air, heavy and luminous. Dominic swallowed. "I'd like that," he said. That night, after Lily was asleep, Dominic asked me to stay. Not in his bed, just close. I lay beside him, careful of his injuries, my head resting against his shoulder. His arm wrapped around me slowly, reverently, as if afraid I might vanish. "I almost lost you," he said quietly. "You let me go," I replied. "That's not the same." His voice roughened. "I don't think I could do it again." I looked up at him. "Then don't." He kissed me then, not with urgency, not with restraint, but with a depth that spoke of survival and choice and something that had finally been named. Love. Outside, the storm passed, leaving the city washed and waiting. Victor Hale was still out there, wounded but breathing. But for the first time since this began, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Dominic Russo was no longer fighting to protect me from his world. He was fighting to build one where I could stay. Dominic healed with the impatience of a man unused to waiting. The doctors warned him. Isabella argued. I stayed silent, knowing better than to mistake stillness for surrender. He moved carefully. Yes, but his mind was already 10 steps ahead, mapping exits, calculating risk, preparing for an ending that could only come one way. Victor Hale had gone quiet. No messages, no intermediaries, no threats whispered through shadows. That silence frightened me more than open war. He's planning something. I said one evening as Dominic stood by the window, watching the city settle into dusk. He always is, Dominic replied. That's how men like him survive. And how they die, I said softly. He turned to me then, his gaze steady, searching. When this is over, he said, I need you to make a choice. My chest tightened. About what? About whether you stay, he answered. Not because you're afraid, not because you think you owe me, but because you want to. I walked toward him slowly. You're asking that now I'm asking before I don't get the chance. I rested my forehead against his. Then listen carefully. I'm not staying in your world as it is. His jaw tensed. I know. I'm staying if you're willing to leave parts of it behind. A long pause. Then, quietly, I already have. Victor resurfaced 3 days later, not with violence but with information. Isabella burst into the safe house, her expression sharp with urgency. We traced a money transfer. Shell accounts. Offshore. Victor is moving everything. Running. Dominic said. Or preparing, Isabella corrected. There's more. He leaked documents to the feds. Names. Locations. Dominic went still. Mine. Yes, she said. And his? The room shifted. He's trying to burn the ground beneath both of you, I said. If he can't win, he'll make sure no one does. Dominic nodded slowly. He's forcing an end, and giving you one last opening, Isabella added. If you disappear now, clean break, you might survive this. I looked at Dominic. At what cost? He didn't answer. That night, Dominic told me everything. Not fragments, not half-truths. Everything. The deals he'd made, the lines he'd crossed. The moment he realized there was no way out that didn't involve blood. He spoke without pride, without excuses, just facts, laid bare like scars. When Victor dies, he said quietly, the world I built collapses. There will be consequences. For you, I said. For us, he corrected. I took his hand. Then we faced them. He searched my face. You still don't know what I've done. I know who you are when it matters, I replied. That's enough. His breath shuddered. I don't deserve, I stopped him with a kiss, gentle but unyielding. Deserve has nothing to do with it. Choice does. Victor chose the place. An unfinished high-rise overlooking the river concrete skeleton. Open air, nowhere to hide. He wanted height, spectacle, inevitability. Dominic insisted I stay behind. I refused. This ends with you alive, I said, or it doesn't end at all. They argued quietly, intensely. Isabella watched us both, then and sighed. You're both impossible. Yes, Dominic agreed, but she's right. We went together. Victor waited at the edge of the building. The city spread beneath him like a promise he'd already broken. Dominic, he said pleasantly. You brought her. I always do, Dominic replied. Victor's eyes slid to me. You look hopeful. That's new. I am, I said. Which means you've already lost. He laughed. Love makes people careless. No, Dominic said calmly. It makes them decisive. The conversation that followed was sharp and final, no speeches. No bargains left to make. Victor had crossed too many lines. Dominic had erased too many exits. When the gunfire erupted, it was brief, clean. Victor staggered back. Shock etched across his face, not fear, but disbelief. You'd give it all up, he breathed. For her, Dominic didn't hesitate. I already did. Victor fell. The sound echoed longer than it should have. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. Sirens in the distance. Helicopters overhead. Isabella's voice steady as she coordinated the final pieces. Dominic stood still. his shoulders heavy not with guilt, but with the weight of an ending he'd known was coming. "It's done," I said softly. He looked at me, eyes dark and searching. "Is it Victor is gone?" I said. "But your choice isn't—" He nodded. "I'll testify. Turn over what I have. Step away." "And Lily?" I asked. His gaze softened. "She gets a life untouched by this." I reached for his hand. "Then so do you." Weeks later, we stood on a quiet shoreline far from the city. No guards, no suits, no shadows lurking just beyond reach. Lily ran ahead. Her laughter carried on the wind. Dominic watched her with an expression that still caught me off guard wonder. Something close to peace. "This is the line," he said quietly. "Once I cross it, there's no return." I took his face in my hands, then cross it. He kissed me slow, certain, unafraid. Behind us, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and fire, as if marking the end of one life and the beginning of another. The war was over. What came next would not be easy, but it would be honest, and it would be ours. The house by the sea did not look like an ending. It looked like a beginning that had learned how to breathe. Morning light slipped through wide windows, pale and unhurried, touching wooden floors worn smooth by bare feet. There were no guards at the gate, no tinted cars waiting with engines running. Only the sound of waves folding into the shore and the distant laughter of a child discovering how far her voice could travel. Lily ran ahead, shoes forgotten somewhere behind her, hair tangled by salt and wind. She held a seashell up to the sun as if it might tell her a secret. "Mom," she called, "listen." I smiled and followed. Dominic a step behind me. He moved more slowly now, not because he was wounded, but because he had finally learned that he didn't need to outrun the world. The past had not disappeared. It had been set down. Carefully. Intentionally. We lived under different names for a while. Not hiding, recovering. Dominic testified. As promised. Documents were turned over. Doors closed behind us with the quiet finality of things that would not be reopened. There were headlines, then smaller headlines, then nothing at all. Time did what it always does. It softened the sharpest edges. One evening, as the sun lowered itself into the horizon, Dominic stood beside me on the porch. He had been quiet all day, thoughtful in the way he got when a decision was settling into place. "There's something I want to ask you," he said. I turned toward him. "Ask." He didn't reach for me immediately. Instead, he took a breath, as if grounding himself in the truth of where we were, who we had become. "When we started," he said, "everything was built on a lie." "Yes," I said gently. "And then the lie became protection," he continued. "And then it became love." I waited. "I don't want to live inside something that began as survival anymore," he said. "I want to choose you without needing an enemy to justify it." My heart tightened. "Dominic." He took my hand then, steady and warm. "I'm not asking you to stay because you already have. I'm asking if you'll let me build something new. With you. With Lily. With no shadows waiting at the door." Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't look away. "I already said yes." I whispered, "I've been saying it every day since I came back." Relief crossed his face, not the fierce, hard-won relief of battle, but something softer, something like hope. The wedding was not planned. It simply happened. Isabella arrived one afternoon with a knowing look and a bottle of champagne. "I cleared the permits," she said. "You have an hour." For what I asked, she gestured toward the beach. To stop pretending this needs to be complicated. There were no rows of chairs, no orchestra, no veil that hid my face. Just the ocean, the sky, and the quiet certainty that the people standing with us were enough. Dominic wore a simple linen suit. I wore a dress Lily picked because it looked like happiness. Isabella stood beside us, her expression unreadable until the moment Dominic spoke his vows. Then her eyes softened. just enough to betray everything she didn't say. When it was my turn, my voice didn't shake. I didn't choose you because you were powerful. I said, I chose you because you learned how to be gentle, because you let me go when it hurt you, because you came back without asking me to bleed for it. Dominic's breath caught. I choose you. I finished. For the life we protect together. Lily clapped loudly, delighted by the sound. You can kiss now, she announced. We laughed. And we did. That night, after the last guest had left and the candles burned low, Dominic and I walked the shoreline alone. The moon cast silver paths across the water, as if inviting us forward. I used to think peace was an illusion, he said, something men like me borrowed between wars. And now, I asked. And now I know it's a choice, he replied. One you have to defend every day, not with weapons, but with honesty. I leaned into him, resting my head against his shoulder. We'll defend it. He kissed my hair, together. The months that followed were quiet in the way that matters. Mornings filled with school lunches and misplaced shoes. Afternoons spent learning which days the tide was strongest. Dominic learned how to fix things he'd never noticed before. I learned how to stop bracing for impact. Sometimes the past reached out an article, a rumor, a stranger who looked too long. Dominic never flinched. He didn't hide. He didn't reach for old instincts. He chose the present. One evening, Lily asked him a question that froze him mid-step. Can I call you Dad? The room held its breath. Dominic knelt in front of her, his voice careful. Only if you want to. She nodded solemnly. I do. His hands shook as he pulled her into a hug, eyes closing as if in prayer. When he looked up at me, the gratitude there undid me completely. Years later, when the sea had become as familiar as our own heartbeat, Dominic asked me something else. Do you ever regret it? He said one night as we watched the stars. The danger, I asked. The choice. He clarified. I smiled. Only the days I forget how far we came. He laughed softly. I still wake up sometimes expecting to lose you. I took his hand. Then look. He did. I was still there. Our story did not end with a gunshot or a headline. It ended with continuity. With a man who learned how to live without armor. With a woman who stopped mistaking fear for fate. With a child who grew up knowing that love is not something you survive, it's something you practice. On the morning Lily left for college, Dominic stood in the doorway longer than necessary. Pride and ache tangled together. She'll be okay, I said. He nodded. So will we. And we were. Because once, in a world built on lies and violence, two people chose truth. They chose each other. And they kept choosing long after the danger was gone.